Welcome everyone. Welcome to Black Communities and COVID-19. I am Carla Slocum, and I'm the Director of the Institute of African American Research at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm also Professor of Anthropology. I'm joined today by my co-host, Mark Little, who is Executive Director of the CREATE Center, also at UNC Chapel Hill. If you're not familiar with our program, Mark and this program has arisen out of something called Black Communities, a Conference for Collaboration. We've now sort of expanded it to become Black Communities Webinars for Collaboration. And the mission of what we do here is to try to connect and make partnerships between a variety of people that are interested in helping Black communities boost their capacity to thrive. So the webinar series is carrying that mission forward, that goal forward. And today, each week we focus on a different topic. Today, the topic is historic Black communities. So we're going to spend about the first 45 minutes or so talking with our invited panelists for today. And then we will move on to try to take some questions that we might have if you have emailed them to us at blackcommunities@unc.edu. If you have any questions that you'd like to bring to us, you may send those questions there. So let me introduce our two panelists for today. We have with us today Chaitra Powell, who's the project director of UNC Chapel Hill's Community Driven Archives Grant Project. And since 2014, she served as the African American Collections and Outreach Archivist in the Southern Historical Collection. Originally from Phoenix, she earned her bachelor's degree in sociology and a master's in library science from the University of Arizona in Tucson. Her recent accomplishment includes presenting on a panel, Imagining Archives Without Borders, for the International Gullah Geechee and African Diaspora Conference. She has also had an accomplishment curating an exhibit in Wilson's Special Collections Library called On the Move, Stories of African American Migration and Mobility. And also joining us is N.Y. Nathiri, who has worked in the field of historic preservation since 1987, having devoted that time on behalf of her hometown, Eatonville, Florida. This is the hometown which Zora Neale Hurston popularized as, quote, the oldest incorporated African American municipality in the United States. As a founding member of the Association to Preserve the Eatonville Community, also known as PEC, Nathiri led the successful 20-year effort to thwart a community busting road project that has been proposed by Orange County, Florida government in 1987. During the course of that fight, the organization, with the support of grassroots activists, distinguished scholars, and cultural icons, established in 1990 the annual Zora Neale Hurston Festival of the Arts and Humanities, also known as Zora Festival. And if you haven't checked it out, you really should. It's also now known as America's longest running Arts and Humanities Festival, celebrating the cultural contributions of persons of African ancestry to the United States and throughout the diaspora. We are delighted to have our two panelists here. You might have seen in our communication that we were also expecting to have Mayor Vernon Curl from Taft, Oklahoma join us, but unfortunately, due to some circumstances, he is unable to join us today, but perhaps we'll be able to include him in future programming. So what I'd like to do, though, with our two panelists today is start out by just asking them generally to help tell us about the histories of the communities that you work with or represent here today. Just give the audience a little bit of background on these historic communities. Miss NY, would you like to start?
All right. Eatonville is located about 10 miles northeast of downtown Orlando. We are, I would say, rural/suburban. When you come into Eatonville, you really have a distinct sense of being in a different space from the greater metropolitan Orlando area. It's a community of about 2,500 souls. In a good day, maybe 2,800. But it really is a small town in every sense of the word. My mother, who is 102 and the oldest resident there, says that it's essentially everybody in Eatonville is an extended family. If you go back wide enough, we're probably all cousins or kissing cousins. Our family has been in Eatonville since, has had a connection with Eatonville since the early 1900s, and we're newcomers. Eatonville really was founded as a part of what we call the Black Towns movement out of the Reconstruction era. And it was founded, we say, by Black men who had money to buy land from white men who were willing to sell that land in Maitland. People know of Eatonville as a literary destination really because of Zora Neale Hurston, the writer, the anthropologist, and the folklorist. We can say that without a doubt it is Zora Neale Hurston that saved the town of Eatonville from being really rent asunder by a community busting highway, because Eatonville, even today, remains the largest undeveloped parcel of land in Orange County. And it has location, because it's on the I-4 corridor. So that will give you a little bit of a sense of Eatonville. For example, we're not concerned about crime. Eatonville is not a high crime area. I have a colleague who says that there are no homeless people in Eatonville. There may be people who don't want to go home, but essentially there are no homeless people. So that will give you a sense of, I also have a colleague who says that Eatonville is like a brigadoon. It's by no way perfect or idyllic in the technical sense, because it is low socioeconomic. There's no doubt about that, but there is a sense about community pride in the town.
Thanks. And Chaitra, tell us about the communities that you work with through your archival work. You're on mute.
Good morning. Yeah, thanks for having me. So as Carla said, I am an archivist based in Chapel Hill, but one of our pilot partner communities is the Historically Black Towns and Settlements Alliance, of which Eatonville is a part. We work with 5 historically Black towns across the region and 3 in North Carolina. So across those 8, they all have really significant histories. And I thought it would be good to kind of talk about the way that I've learned about them and why they're historic, just thinking about the contrast between some of the events that are happening today. And, you know, I feel like the founding of these towns really represents a lot of the radical imaginations, like what would a world look like if Black people were seen for their full humanity. And there's so many examples across the towns that we work with. I know, like, when I look at something like Flint and the water situation, and I contrast it to Tuskegee, where they made plans to manage their own water systems. Something like Oscar So White, where you feel like Black people are excluded from a lot of entertainment decisions, and you think about Hobson City and the clubs and Chitlin Circuit destinations that they had in their communities. Even something like public safety in Hobson City, to have a completely Black fire department and police department, and the way that they would see each other as equals and people worthy of respect and recognition. So, you know, that's just, you know, learning about the stories, they exist, and then having the great honor of helping support their archival efforts really does bring a perspective to today's events that can be really important for activists or people who are just starting to educate themselves in anti-racism ideas. So I'll leave it there for the moment, but a lot of significant histories in the towns that we work with.
Great, thank you both. Before I jump to the next question, I do just want to acknowledge kind of the role of HBTSA, the organization that Chaitra mentioned that includes Eatonville, the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance, and the work we're doing here actually today. So, you know, before Carla and I put together the first Black Communities Conference back in 2015, we partnered with the Historic Black Towns and Settlements Alliance on a workshop, a day-and-a-half workshop here at UNC Chapel Hill, where that's where I first met Ms. NY, and we had mayors from the 8 historic Black towns that Chaitra mentioned, and some other folks from those communities who came here, and we had a really powerful discussion. And the connection there really was around the culture and history of those places and how that can be archived, but also leveraged to educate people outside of those communities, bring some of those people to those communities, to engage with them, economic development, tourism, all these aspects. And so I just want to mention that because we have a long, not long connection like Ms. Inouye was talking about, but we have, we're proud of the connection that we have here with these communities. So with that, a little bit of background that you provided about some of these communities, I'm sure more will come up. I wonder if we can move to the immediate for a little while and just talk a little bit about what's been going on in some of these communities since February and March, as COVID-19 and this pandemic has touched every place around the world. And so maybe just a kind of a broad question, what is the overall picture of COVID-19 for Eatonville and Chaitra, for you, for some of the communities that you might have been engaging with since these happenings have been going on? And I'll just leave it there to just think broadly about, how is your community responding? How has it been affected? Any examples around, specifically around the healthcare side in terms of testing, or just how your communities might be approaching the current crisis?
I'll speak in personal terms because, as I say, my mother is 102, and many of the people in Eatonville are senior citizens. And I think that there really is an understanding of the need to keep them safe. In Eatonville, there are 14 churches, but I can tell you that no one has been, the church services have been suspended, in-person church services, as a direct result of the call by the Orange County Mayor, Jerry Demings, to understand that kind of close contact, what the challenges and the health possibilities are in terms of hurting yourself. And so that to me is a significant understanding and appreciation for the negative aspects of COVID. I don't have any data about whether we've had any cases, but I think that we would have heard because there is still that active grapevine. So I can say that we don't know of any active cases. And on April 20th was my mother's birthday. And so, but no one came, but the motorcycle, the Kings and Queens Motorcycle Club came by that Saturday in her yard, and paid their respects and left some flowers for her. So that really, I think, bespeaks how there is interaction but no interaction.
And maybe, Chaitra, before you go, I just want to jump in and call out Carla a little bit here. Last time I heard Carla talking about her work in Oklahoma with the historic Black towns there. I remember her talking about a street festival that brought together sort of the elders and the young folks together in this festival. And it's kind of what you described about the motorcycle folks coming and to respect your mother as the matriarch of the community to me, I just that connection seemed I saw the connection. I just wanted to mention that. So it was really, very, very nice to hear that happened.
Yeah. Right. So I was thinking about this question in a couple parts. I recently listened to a podcast or something about how to support people during COVID and the importance of, care packages, giving people stuff, giving them services and support, some social connection, even though we're physically distant. And I would say that since I currently live in a historically African-American neighborhood in the North Side neighborhood of Chapel Hill, they've really doubled down on that in terms of making the local community center, the Marion Cheek Jackson Center, has made weekly phone calls to residents. They're handing out masks to people at their front doors. A couple weeks ago, I participated in neighborhood bingo via Zoom. And so I just feel like the community is really coming together in COVID, especially given the aging population and some of the socioeconomic challenges of the people in this neighborhood. A second way that I would answer this is thinking about the communities that we work with through HBTSA. And in January, having no idea what was coming, we unrolled some new initiatives to do local history projects across 10 different communities on our grant. And, once COVID hit in March, I sent the message like, whatever you're going through, this project is secondary. Don't worry about some of those prior commitments. And resoundingly, people wanted to keep going. They modified their oral history projects to be physically distant. In a lot of ways, they felt like their work in documenting and sharing stories from their communities was even more important given the current context. So that's been my experience so far.
I would also add that Mayor David Allen in Prairie View shared with us some time ago how people had come together to purchase meals for senior citizens so they could drop them by. And so that was, and they were able to do that specifically because of the support of local business people and our contributions so that senior citizens could have a nice meal, at least on that Friday, drop and go. So that's another instance of how people in traditional African American community settings are addressing COVID.
You are both doing work related to preservation of your community's histories and of historic Black communities' histories. And I wondered if you could speak a little bit about what trying to do that work actually means in the current moment during the pandemic. Are there challenges associated with doing that? I mean, it's interesting, Chaitra, you mentioned that the Marion Cheek Jackson Center had a lot of interest from people about continuing to do that work. Are there challenges though associated with it, or are there new opportunities that are available for doing that kind of work? Before the call, we started talking about some of the funding that may be out there, so maybe we could also include that as part of this discussion.
Yeah, well, just thinking about some of the opportunities that have come through, especially for established museums. We're working closely with the Tuskegee History Center and their executive director, Deborah Gray, to see if they can get some of that NEH and IMLS funds to support their museum.
Tell everybody what IMLS stands for.
Yeah, that's the Institute of Museums and Library Services, and NEH is the National Endowment for Humanities, and they're both federally funded programs, and they have some funding for museums and libraries. Yeah. But yeah, thinking about challenges, I might need a minute on that one. I don't know.
In Edenville, last night, for example, we had a Zoom meeting. When I say we, in January, the state of Florida designated Edenville as a Main Street community. Main Street is a long-standing historic preservation foundation program nationally. Under the state of Florida, it really is seen as a strong economic development initiative. And so this is a very important element that is being, how would you say, driven by Edenville's Community Redevelopment Agency, the CRA in Edenville. So that was a Zoom meeting. I think that we had about 12 stakeholders. It was really reaffirming for me to hear how the stakeholders who represented faith communities, businesses, individuals, elected officials, how they talked about what they wanted to see as a part of the Main Street Initiative, because in every instance, it represents the mission statement and the vision statement of the association to preserve the Eatonville community, which is a nonprofit that I head. So it really is, when you're doing this kind of work, and essentially it's grassroots work, and it relies upon the trust and the engagement of people, not only in the community, but outside of the community. And I want to be very specific. Right now, I'm sitting in the home of Vivian Gary, who doesn't live in Eatonville, but who has been really a foundational member of the team that helps to present the annual Zora Festival. And it's really, in some ways, a family situation. I've had people, professional people, and I've had people in the field, elected officials, say that Eatonville has achieved a disproportionate amount of resources and even reputation, because essentially we're organized around Preserve Eatonville Community as a 501c3. And what that means specifically is, for example, we have been able to get the PPP. We have been able to access the small business, the SBA's Small Business Administration, because of relationships. We would never have been able to do this, I can assure you, by ourselves. And one of the challenges that personally I feel, having worked in the field for over 3 decades, is that we really look to the opportunities to really make a generations-long contribution to our communities writ large by collaboration. I think that this webcast series really is a starting point. But as I believe that we can access resources that will allow for serious work, almost what I would call a plan to plan, right? So that we have the ability to pass on to those who are coming behind us, as well as people who are in the moment, that we can improve the quality of life for our communities and really for the American citizenry, because it is so important that the ignorance, and I use ignorance in a definitional way, the lack of knowledge by the American population as a whole in terms of the American story and where we as a group fit into that. If we can mitigate that, I think that we really can look forward to having an optimistic view of this country for the next 500 years.
So I want to ask a question related to the murder of George Floyd, but I want to kind of connect it to some of Ms. NY, some of what you were just talking about. And so, you know, as has been mentioned a little bit in the conversation, the creation of many, not all, but many historic Black towns in the United States is a result of people who had agency wanting to create away from violence, away from fear, and create spaces and communities that had power that could be exercised and pride, et cetera, et cetera. And so, and you know, Carla and I have this has started to infuse our conversations as these events are happening, to see these parallels between what is has surfaced for the general population, which it's been there for Black people and Black communities, but around oppression and state-sanctioned violence against Black people. And so I'm wondering if maybe you could talk a little bit about, from your perspective, Ms. Nwai, and from your perspective, Chaitra, working with historic Black towns, how do you see this moment in terms of what's happening, but also the organizing around what's happening? And what kind of role do you see for the story of the past of historic Black towns and the current existence of historic Black towns? What pertinence do you see that on this, what's happening right now related to the response to police brutality and murders and violence?
Right. I mean, that's such an important question. And I was thinking about a talk that I went to from Dr. William Sturkey, where he was talking about the response in Mount Bayou to the death of Emmett Till, and how a prominent businessman, T.R.M. Howard, set up these encampments in Mount Bayou, and they were making pilgrimages to Sumner, to the courthouse, and how they were rallying Black newspapers to get these reports and pictures up to Chicago, out to Pittsburgh. And that network of Black business, Black press, and Black community to demonstrate this outcry. And I just compare and contrast that to what's happening with the protests around George Floyd. And I think that there is a big role for Black institutions to play today, as big as they had played in the 1950s. And I think that it's more of an opportunity than anything else for people to look at these institutions that have been here for 100 years, see what they did, bring them into the conversations about what we can do. I think that we'll really miss out if we don't engage the folks that have been here all along. Their experience and their wisdom is just priceless, and it's going to give a direction and a moderation and a lastingness to what comes next than folks that are just waking up today. I mean, it just doesn't even make sense to not think about what's been done before as we launch into these new ideas. New ideas to look at systemic racism. So,
what I'd like to do is to, give the 3-minute history, picking up on what you said, Dr. Little, about the emergence of historic Black towns and settlements. And they came specifically because as a realization that if Black people were going to live safely, that they needed to come together and form their own communities. Now, in the broader scheme of things, this kind of utopianism is part and parcel of the American story. Some people would say that that's why America was founded in some instances. So after the Civil War and the assassination of President Lincoln, and this is by way, these are facts. This is not revisionist history. This is not some kind of perspective. You can go to Google or wherever, we used to say go to the Encyclopedia Britannica and you find this out, okay? But after the assassination of Lincoln, who had envisioned a softer, gentler Reconstruction, there was the levying of the housing of federal troops in the defeated South. Those federal troops protected the former enslaved. In 1876, there was an election, a controversial election. Rutherford B. Hayes said the election went to the House of Representatives. He said to the Southerners, if you will vote for me, I will remove the federal troops. All right? That happened. And when the federal troops were removed, we had a whole, just an onslaught of lynching. We're talking Black and white because that's what we're talking. The Indians, the Native Americans, are already off in places that became reservations. But the Black people were being lynched. They lost their land. there was a series of what's called black codes passed by state legislatures in the South to assure black labor, all right? So that meant incarceration. When we talk about incarceration, those men went to the chain gang and they got out of jail when the boss said they could get out of jail. Maybe they were hurt and they were, but this is a way to really ensure the labor, right? When you hear, I can remember years and years ago, Reverend Jesse Jackson said that with the Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decision in 1896 or 1898, that what the men in the black robes enshrined in law is simply a result of what the men in the white robes, the Ku Klux Klan and the Night Riders, had done. So you had people who said, if we can't live safely amongst whites, then we need to separate ourselves. And so you have Mount Bayou, and you have Eatonville, and you have Grambling. Right? So this is a part of that movement, and it was a direct result of not being able to live safely. So that's a part of the context. At the same time, you had people in these communities who developed institutions, Grambling University, Tuskegee University Institute. Eatonville Hungerford School was founded directly by people who were graduates of Tuskegee Institute. So now if you bring this forward, what you have, even though we now have COVID and people may not be traveling for some time in the way that they have been accustomed to traveling, we can expect that just as what happened with 9/11, it may take people 4 or 5 years to get back on a plane, but Disney World is reopening, Universal is reopening, and we know that there is an interest. We have seen this with the annual Zora Festival and as well as year-round. People are interested in history, heritage, and culture. And so when you talk about African-American cultural heritage tourism, and this is data-driven, all right, cultural heritage tourists spend more money, they stay a half a day longer, they will come back to the areas that they're interested in. That's the mainstream. Now, when we talk about the niche, we as African-American cultural heritage tourists, we spend even more money, okay? We are interested in our heritage, in our history, and so there's an economic imperative here that if you know your story, if you like to be with people, if you enjoy people, if you see hospitality as a part, that you really can see an economic benefit in your community. That's the case. That is really the case. So there's opportunity there that's already been established, and as we make our way through all of this current situation, it's something that we can look to.
Can you tell us, thank you for all of that. I'm wondering if you can tell us more about the Zora Neale Hurston Festival. And I mean, that happened in January, so, you know, maybe 6 or 8 weeks before we all went to sheltering in our homes. So you sounds like you skirted that. But as you're preparing for it and thinking in the future, how is it impacting how you're thinking about the future of this important and very significant festival?
Well, in March, we assembled our annual Zora Festival National Planners, scholars and people from around the country, and we understood then that we needed to explore a different model. For people who are not familiar with what we do, it's a 9-day event, and it is how to say, a high point is the Outdoor Festival of the Arts. Generally, that's where we see the tens of thousands of people. But leading up to that, there's a whole series of indoor programs as well as conference. So what we have determined, we know we will do this based on our relationship with the University of Central Florida. We're going to offer festival it as an event and as a course. a course where you can get credit if you are enrolled at University of Central Florida, but also where you can audit. In other words, one of our members, Dr. Cheryl Bachelor Robinson, is on faculty at Spelman, and she spoke with us about the ability to have her students be able to take different assignments as a part of the festival course. This will be the spring semester, but we will actually start in November. And so we're looking at it as an event. We're looking at the opportunity. Actually, I have to say to you, and in some ways, I'm going to be very personal because sometimes I can be entirely too structured. But this door, it opened up and we are walking straight through it because it's going to give us access to it's going to give us a global access. And we are just, we're very excited about what will happen at Festival. We see it as a hybrid. We see that there will be some people who will come to the indoor portions, all right? But it's the whole content, which is Afrofuturism, all right? And so we are very excited about what this means in terms of the world being our oyster. You know, Zora Neale Hurston talks about sharpening up her knife and that she sees the world as her oyster. So we are very excited about what will happen with Festival. We urge people, give us until probably August, go to zorafestival.org and you will see what we're looking at. But I do want to say that what we've seen with Festival, it just is, it is humbling. But you really, at that time, literally tens of thousands of people come to Eatonville. But what is even more exciting is what happens year-round. We actually have tours, and I need to say this in this way because Ms. Shader can tell you. All right, Eatonville, we don't have a lot of old buildings. All right, we're not like Tuskegee, we're not like Grandin, we're not like Mount Bayou, where there are built structures. All that Eatonville has is a story. People pay us to come and experience that story. So when I'm not talking now, when I say this, I'm talking seriously about people who are spending money to come. And so I'll give you an instance. I'll give you a specific instance because this is the way it typically can happen. Because we're in Orlando and people will come, they come to Disney World, they come to Universal, they go to the Holy Land experience, all right? So we will see a tour bus that's going to be in the area for say 3 or 4 days, and they will spend 2.5 hours in Eatonville. That's a part of their day. They will pay each of those people on that bus, and I'll take 45 people. 45 people each will have paid $30 for a 2-hour tour. They are going to come. They will go to several areas in Eatonville, to the museum, to Town Hall, to St. Lawrence AME Church, to the Mosley House, all right? Typically, if I read to them why, from Zora Neale Hurston's Mules and Men, why it is that women will always have the upper hand over men, they're going to buy that book from Mules and Men. And when we have finished there, typically, and we give them a package, so it's not just a lot of talk, they actually have something they can take home with them, that is about a $1,500, that's about a $1,500 event. That's just from a story. We are prepared, but I'm just saying to you that that is how you see the economic impact. And then if they go to Coleman's for pizza, if they go to Dodgin Eats to the vegan restaurant, or if they go to, Soul Food Fantasy, that's money there. They go to St. Lawrence, they leave a little something there. So this is, as we say, the real deal. This is how you can actually have people in your community be able. They might buy Miss Darlene's sweet potato pies to take home with them. It's a cottage industry that really can work.
I just, related to what you're talking about, I just recently participated in a virtual Oklahoma Black Towns tour. And typically these are bus tours, but they're not possible to do that way now. And so we had this virtual tour, but I was thinking also about the loss to the communities, because while a lot of these tourism activities for Black towns in Oklahoma are generated from organizations that are outside the community, there still is that interaction where there's some degree of a chance to buy a t-shirt in the community or buy something. And so by going online, they're losing that. And then of course, the organization in Tulsa that runs this particular tour had to do their virtual tour for free. So they're also not getting that revenue. And this is a organization that supports a Black community. So I was thinking about the economic losses related to putting tourist activities online, virtually, that sort of way. Chaitra, for you and the communities that you're working with, are you aware of any of these kinds of issues going on?
Yeah, I mean, that's really one of the most innovative things about the partnership with UNC, like between Mark's program and when the mayors came, is really thinking about cultural tourism and what do you need to get to a place where you can start doing cultural tourism events. And a lot of that is the archive and the story. And so, we're working with the mayor of Navassa, who wants to establish a Gullah Geechee Heritage Center. And, I haven't talked to him recently, but I know that this kind of, travel restrictions and people not coming are going to impact his plans and his timeline. I've heard similar stories from Tuskegee where people feel like folks just come to see the university, the 2 federal sites, and they just cycle right back out to, Auburn or wherever else they're going. Totally missing. There's a repertory theater there. There's a Tuskegee History Center there. There's incredible churches there that welcome visitors and donations. And so I think it's really smart to tie together the history and the cultural tourism. And it really kind of harkens back to the creative problem solving that a lot of these town founders have to do. They can't just study history for the sake of history. They've got to think about how that helps with food deserts and some of the economic hardships that these towns, and thinking about the migration of so many people leaving, how do we support the folks that are left behind that maintain this heritage and this culture? So, cultural tourism is a great avenue for addressing some of those issues.
Yeah, and I just want to take privilege here to just to call out a couple of projects that my team is working on right now that are directly related to this. So Chaitra mentioned the town of Navassa, a Gullah Geechee community that's in North Carolina. There's another town, the town of Leland, and we're working with an elder there named George Beatty on development of a rice festival. So as many of us know, the history of rice is part and parcel of why many Africans were taken to the Americas to bring that technology and knowledge. And the way that that community is thinking about it is really very much in line with what, a lot of the things that Ms. NY was talking about, how to create an event that is much more than an event. And so NY, I'll be connecting you with George and their team as they're working through this. But it's there's just so much so much there amongst all of these communities that it's overwhelming and powerful, and really a shame that it's taken so long for some, just for what's been able to penetrate. I mean, the work that PEC has done is phenomenal, but it's so much work, to make it a reality.
It is, and if I could say this,
yes.
It's very important that it's almost you put your bucket down where you are, and really to understand. This is not some sort of smoke screen. I want to acknowledge that if you go back, and Ms. Chaitra, you and I are both librarians, if you do the research, the New York Times has become masterful in how they have organized cultural tourism as a revenue generator, right? When you talk about the gap years, they talk about grandparents. In other words, there are so many ways to really market this. The challenge, I think, for us who are looking at this is just to make sure that we really are customer service driven, all right? That, that we have the water. Everybody's not eating pig feet now, okay? There are some vegans, there are some vegetarians, there are people who are not looking at fried foods. We have to, this is not a social cause, it is economic development, and we have to realize that people who are traveling, they are investing their money, and so you want to give them, that experience. But these are major dollars that can come as long as you do the work. There's a 7P principle, the military, prior, proper planning, prevents, performance, okay? So you just need to be able to commit to that. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing and a wonderful opportunity to be able to share.
I had a question that kind of came to mind as we were talking about kind of economic development in Black communities, and then also in this historic sense of how these communities were created. And, much of the initial violence against Black people that caused these, it was one of the reasons why these communities formed, was around economics. And if we move forward in time, we see this pattern of oftentimes one of the main motivation for destruction of Black communities is around economics. And whether it's the success of Greenwood in Tulsa, whether it's the success of what Black and white people were doing in Wilmington, whether it's the success of Hayti in Durham, the Black community in Durham, there's this angle, there's this connection between violence and economic success. And so I just want to maybe just kind of bring that forward into today's context, particularly as we think about a lot of the adoption of the language of Black Lives Matter by corporate America, which, so all these things are floating in my mind together, right, around power and economics and violence. And so just again, I want to kind of position this around Black communities, and maybe we could talk a little bit about maybe on the more historical side, so the history of economies in in Eatonville, but also in some of these other Black communities around that broader infrastructure, whether it's banks or in other types of businesses. And Carla, I would encourage you to jump in on this one as well, because I know this touches on your research and your work. And just what are your thoughts in terms of what's going on right now, and what the promise you see is, or what concerns you might have with the direction that things are moving?
I'd also love to just prod that question a little bit, and also ask you to tell us what people are talking about in the communities that you're aware of related to these questions that Mark is bringing up. I think they're prominent today.
Wow, that's a hard question. I was just thinking to add Rosewood to that list too, about violence connected to economic, and that it takes a little bit of context and historiography to look at that through the lens of the George Floyd situation. It's not as obvious. I like, this is just like stream of consciousness, but I just been thinking that it's really interesting how the protests moved so quickly to be about George Floyd and policing, to racism and slavery and Confederate monuments, and how that fire just kind of moved through the South so quickly and people were able to grab on. And so, as I think about my work and things I do, I try to imagine, how to improve conditions for the least of us, the people that are having the hardest time. And I think that there's something about the African American experience that allows so many groups to kind of latch on to these movements around Black lives. And I feel like it's raised conversations about, the role of women. How has the Breonna Taylor situation been different from the George Floyd response, how are trans women being treated in this milieu, and even the idea of defunding the police or abolishing the police. And then you hear from African American communities who say, you know, the police never served us. All they do is harass us. So to eliminate them does not feel like a stretch of the imagination. And you're just really just seeing like the different planets that all of us live on in this American experiment. So that does not answer the question about how economics are tied to, you know, this violence in Black communities. But those are some of the conversations that I've been having with peers and colleagues over the last few weeks.
I guess I'm also just thinking about this in the context of historic Black communities, especially in rural areas. I think we're hearing a lot about this as an urban protest, as urban kinds of concerns being expressed. And I'm wondering if you're hearing about how these concerns are playing out, what the action around them is, how that's playing out in historic Black communities, but particularly in a rural setting.
I would say this, that it's not the same set of circumstances, because it's not the same set of circumstances. In other words, the police authority in Hobson City or Eatonville, it's not the same. I mean, we know all of our police, okay? And if there's a problem, we're going to call the police. What they need is more resources. It's interesting to note that the budget, Eatonville's budget, the police department has a lion's share of that. I was interested to hear how other communities talk in the same way. But I do think that it has in part to do with the relationship that you have had. And so it's a different relationship when you are being served or protected by people who know who you are. And that's not to say that that sometimes the police authority may come across as over the top, but in a place like Eatonville, but you don't hear it that often. You have people calling to ask the police to come to their rescue. I would also say, and I want to repeat what Mr. Frank Smith said when he, shortly after he'd given the graduation speech at Morehouse, and he'd forgiven the debts, the student debts. I think when he talked about the fact that within our community, we have the economic wherewithal. It's just where do we allocate it? And I will leave you with this expression, which the preacher told his congregation: if it's on your ASS, it's not an asset.
We're glad that we're joined now by Pastor Robert Turner, who is with the Vernon AME Church in Tulsa, Oklahoma. We appreciate you being able to join us. We know you had other obligations. I'm glad you could fit a little bit of time in to join us. So welcome. We're glad to have you here. We're actually, the question that we're just talking about, and maybe you'd like to share your thoughts on its relevance to Greenwood, where you're based, is just what is the talk going on in historic Black communities about the protests and what's happened with George Floyd and their specific relationship to police. And we might actually find among the panelists here, that there's some variation.
Yeah, we definitely, heart goes out to George Floyd and his family. I have, and other community organizers have participated in several marches and protests demanding for justice and transformation of our police department and criminal justice system as a whole. We started Saturday, immediately following George Floyd's murder. We shut down the interstate. We Then the next day, I was a part of another rally, and there was even more people. And it's just been persistent pressure on our elected officials. And recently, the mayor, after we're calling a press conference, he came to our press conference and said he would meet with us. We met for like 3 hours. From that meeting, he agreed to end live PD and pledged to have more meetings. I call live PD a modern day minstrel show, and because that's what I thought it is these reality cop shows. And then since he pulled back on that contract, we saw on A&E that they basically ended all like cop reality shows. So I was happy to see that. But I mean, that same mayor goes on CBS national news and says that Terrence Crutcher, who was killed in 2016, our African-American unarmed black man, that he was killed not because of his race, but because he was on drugs. And that was, to me, totally disrespectful to the family. And so I and several others called the mayor out on that. I said, Terrence Crutcher didn't die from a drug overdose. He died from a bullet wound. And so we have to continue to fight. And then one of our majors here in the city recently said, according to the data, we don't kill black people enough. Major Yates. I mean, that's just sickening. And so we take one step forward, 3 steps back. And that's just really been the plight of our struggle really since our inception in this country. And so the current climate is we're passionate. We have 45, who I refer to as the Russian ambassador to the U.S., coming to speak, launching his campaign, launching his re-election campaign next Friday on June 19th. We're his first political stop. He chose to do it on Juneteenth. I just left Andrea Mitchell's show a little while ago, saying how disgusting it is that this president, who has sympathized with neo-Confederates, comes to launch his campaign on Juneteenth, a day that celebrates African-American independence from chattel slavery. The same president who just recently chose not to rename military bases that are named for Confederate generals, now wants to come and launch his campaign on Juneteenth. I think it's sickening and disgusting. We are not happy he's coming. We are not excited that he's coming. He will not get the red carpet rolled out in our community, especially in Greenwood. And so we just hope that his crowd stays peaceful, because people are asking about how we're going to respond. And I tell the press that I hope his crowd is peaceful, because they have a propensity of attracting violence. I mean, every rally he's attended, every rally he's had, his last campaign, you had people who were being assaulted for different viewpoints. He even stokes violence. He says things like, we had a way of handling that type of stuff, back in our day. So I hope he keeps his crowd straight, because we have a history of keeping ours straight.
Thank you for that, Pastor, and really happy to have you join us. And we're going to go a little over here because we think these are important topics, and happy to have you join us. Maybe just a question kind of related to that. So some of the broader context of what we were talking about was how Black communities are responding to this moment, but also what's the connection between this sort of violence and some of the history of these communities. And it's my hope that everyone already knows about Greenwood, but I know they don't. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us just a little bit about sort of the history of your community, and those kind of connections between, let's say specifically, economic success of Black communities and violence against those communities.
Oh yeah, thank you for the question. The church sits on 307-311 North Greenwood. And Greenwood was the main heartbeat of the largest and most prosperous economic place for African Americans in the country. I mean, you're talking about before Harlem Renaissance, before Auburn Avenue in Atlanta, before Beale Street in Memphis. Greenwood was that place. We had the highest per capita home ownership than any place in the country for African Americans, largely attributed to the oil boom that occurred here in Oklahoma. And you had Black people in the 1900s, early 1900s, owning T-model Fords that just came out. I mean, black people having maids, black people having 3-story homes, mansions, black people owning airplanes, and businesses, banks, hotels, theaters, and white folks couldn't stand it. I mean, it drove them crazy because that went against every stereotype or prejudice that they have of us. I mean, this is a generation out of slavery that now owns their own bank. A generation out of slavery where they legally still couldn't read, not supposed to, now having their own schools. It drove them crazy. It went against that narrative that we were just some dumb monkeys that can't function without slavery. That was the narrative that these good Christian white folks told themselves, that we need to be under their control so we can live and prosper. But Greenwood showed them otherwise. And so one day, it was a young lady on the elevator, Sarah Page, who was an elevator operator, and Diamond Dick Rowland, who was a shoe shine boy. He had dropped out of high school because he found he could make more money shining shoes, because so many men need their shoes shine. And so he was going to the, and because of Jim Crow, which was the first law passed in the state of Oklahoma in 1907, they said blacks can use the same bathrooms as whites. So he had to go upstairs to use the restroom. Sarah Page was the elevator operator, white young lady. Depending on who you listen to, what books you read, he stepped on a shoe, bumped into her. Somebody opened the elevator and saw them close. She screamed, ran out. Then they promoted this narrative that black boy assaults white girl on the elevator. They arrested him, put him in jail. Black men went, and then the white folks, 300, 400 some white folks started surrounding the jail because they were going to lynch him because he assaulted a white girl. The black men heard about it. Black men said, you ain't gonna lynch him. We're gonna go and we want to help support law enforcement. So the black men went and surrounded the jail, but with their guns. He's a former World War veteran, so they knew how to use a gun. And they said, you're not gonna kill this brother. And to me, that optics is remarkable, because the fact that black men in 1921 had enough audacity to go to a courthouse and say, y'all not killing this young black brother. And to me, that I get inspired by that, and I get embarrassed by that, because we have, to this day, we still have black boys getting killed and murdered by the police, and we don't have that same bravery in our community where these men said, you know what, y'all not killing him. And I get chills every time I think about that. And so the white guys was like, how dare these blanks come down here, tell us what to do. The sheriff says to the black men, hey, we got it. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to let anything happen to Dick Rowland. He's going to see us there in court. The black guys, it was about a dozen of them said, you sure, Sheriff, you good? Sheriff said, I'm good. So the black men head back home. On the way back home, a young black kid runs up to him and says, hey, they about to lynch, they about to kill, they about to get Dick Rowland out of jail. So the black men come back. This time, instead of 12, they had like about 36 or 40. And then this time, the white mob of a couple of hundred turns into several thousand. And it was a lot of folks' minds, it was a setup. So the black men come back. The sheriff tells them again, hey, we good, go back. I don't need your help. On the way back, one of the white men comes up to one of the black men and says, what are you doing with that gun in the NIGGER? The black man looked at him, one of them was my church actually, and said, it's my gun, and I use it if I have to. These black men were so bold. I mean, it goes against his whole step and fetcher notion of how black men were in the 1920s. These men were men, like straight up. And he said, I use it if I have to. White guy, that's like, how dare you speak back to me? First of all, how dare you have a gun? Second of all, how dare you speak back to me? And third of all, how dare you kind of threaten me, saying I use it if I have to. Black folks always been for Second Amendments. There's white folks who didn't want us to have our guns, first of all. And so the white man tries to take the gun from the black man. That's a big no-no in gun safety. Anybody tell you don't try to take a gun. Unless you Bruce Lee, you shouldn't try to take a gun from somebody who has a gun. And as he was trying to take the gun goes off. The white man gets hit. Didn't die, but he got hit. And then all hell breaks loose. Now the white folks, these black blanks coming down here trying to kill us. They shooting up the place. And everybody who was there knows that wasn't the case. Black men were walking away. White man comes up to them, tries to take the gun from him, and the gun goes off. So then that's what started the shooting. And we kept up a good fight for a while. But when the white mob, over 2,000, was deputized, the same sheriff that told the black men he didn't need our help, deputized 2,000 members of that white mob. I mean, let's get that for a moment. Black men came down to assist law enforcement. Sheriff said, I don't need your help. And the very people that was about to break into the sheriff's jail, the county jail, he deputizes them and says, now we can go kill these black folks. And that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. And it was a pretty good fight up until they just started using airplanes. And this was the first time airplanes were used to terrorize Americans. It wasn't 9/11. It wasn't Pearl Harbor. It was right here in 1921 in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And the first perpetrators, the first terrorists, aerial terrorists in the country's history were white folks. And the first victims of that terrorism were black people. And that's a narrative people don't really talk a lot about. And so they killed innocent people. They would go to your house. They would loot it. Before they come to your house and loot it, they would ask you to come out at gunpoint. If you didn't come out quick enough, they'll shoot. If you came out, they still would shoot you. Then if you were blessed to survive, you had to walk down the streets with your hands up, kind of like still saying hands up, don't shoot. You had to walk down the streets with your hands up for miles. And they put us in concentration camps. And you could not get out until a white person could come vouch for you and say you were good. And they gave you this green card saying you were good. You were a good Negro. You can come out of the concentration camps. And that's what happened. And they tried to pass laws to take the land from us. They were unsuccessful in doing that. And because we had lawyers back then, even back then, we had lawyers suing for reparations. They didn't win, but even back then, they had lawyers suing for reparations. And the white folk were so treacherous, they filed charges against the black people. But none of those folk who bombed, killed, and looted were ever charged with a crime. And then the next morning, of course, we called our insurance company to file a claim, which people normally do after you suffer loss. None of the insurance companies honored the claim. No, can you imagine losing your house today and you call your insurance company and want to file a claim and they say, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to honor that claim. And the reason they didn't was because the white folks called it a riot, not a massacre. And that's how, but still, the ingenuity of black people, that's why I love my people, they still rebuilt Greenwood without any insurance claim ever being paid, without any city official ever giving reparations, without the state giving any reparations. They built Greenwood back to bigger and better than before. And never mind the fact now, that I didn't tell you this, Dick Rowland, I taught his family members, Dick Rowland and Sarah Page left town and got married. They were dating. And the black folks knew it. That's why the black man was like, y'all not killing this brother in jail, because everybody in the black, because they in the black side of town, because the white folk would kill them for dating. So they would come and they would court in the black side of town, and they left town and got married after the massacre. So all of this over, and the white folks even knew she was not assaulted. The white folk who knew, but because she never physically pressed charges. It was the white folk who just wanted to arrest him. And so you have all this for a lie, because it really wasn't about Dick Rowland and Sarah Page. It was about them being racist, not wanting black folks to have the success that they had. We rebuilt afterwards, and afterwards it lasted up until the 60s when Lyndon Johnson started this model cities program, urban renewal, we call urban removal. And they just started buying up black properties and put the interstate highway through the heart of the black community. And that's really what killed Black Wall Street. It wasn't the massacre. We actually rebuilt bigger after the massacre. It was this interstate highway that they just bulldozed through. And they were so treacherous. When they built the highway, they didn't even build an exit ramp to go so you can come and shop on Greenwood. They just bulldozed straight through Greenwood and put the exit ramp on some white side of town to help out their businesses. And that drove property value down. So when the city comes with a cash check saying, we want to buy your property, folks just sold. And as a result, on Greenwood, the only thing that's still black owned is the church I pastor. And that's embarrassing. And the only thing that's still black owned, period, in the whole Greenwood district are just two churches. And that's embarrassing. And the basement of our church is the only thing on Greenwood that survived the massacre that we still have here today. And none of those people who were killed got a proper burial except for 2 of them. And so now I'm on the excavation committee for mass graves trying to find the bodies.
Yeah, that commission, I was going to mention that there is the commission to recognize the centennial of the massacre from 1921. I know that you're on that with a number of other folks. Thank you for giving us that background, and there are lots of places people can go to get even more information about the history of Greenwood. Luckily, the story's getting out more than it had been for all these decades. We are out of time, unfortunately, but we do want to thank our panelists, Pastor Turner, Miss NY Nathiri, and Shaitra Powell for being here today. Great, rich discussion. We appreciate it. Next week, we will be back at the same time, Friday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time. And next week, we're looking at food security in the midst of COVID and other kinds of crises we're dealing with at this time. Thank you, and we will see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Thank you. Mm.